Okay, I'm getting ready to do some resizing on some 338 edge once fired cases. I've already knocked the primers out. I have a separate little RCBS partner press set up with an RCBS universal D prime die. It keeps all the carbon and junk out of my main press. So the first thing I do is I take this bronze bore brush that's chucked up in this little snap-on drill and just clean the insides of the necks just to get any carbon or anything like that out of them. Then I take this little primer pocket uniformer tool and just give her a couple of swipes just to clean the carbon out of the primer pocket. Then I take a chunk of superfine steel wool and just clean the outside of the neck up and the shoulder junction there. And that's it. Now I'll drop them into my corn cob tumbler, and a couple hours later I'll be ready to size. First you get the necks, and then you work into the bodies, and then I just spin the whole box around. I have the cases staggered so that each one gets about the same amount. Do not spray this inside your house. Boy, it's nasty. Alright, let it dry for about 5 or 6 minutes and then I'll set up the die. Okay, cases are nice and clean. They're lubricated with Hornady one-shot. I'm getting ready to size them now in my Redding bushing die. This is a full-length bushing die. Now the two things that we're trying to get here are we're trying to get our neck diameter back to where it needs to be to hold a bullet, and we're trying to set the shoulder back just enough that it'll chamber easily the next time we shoot it. Now, I full-length size everything, and I bump the shoulders back 1 to 2 thousandths depending on what I come up with for spring back, simply because when I get out in the woods I want to be able to throw around in there and just close the bolt and shoot it. Now, I know that I can take these cases and I can chamber them again without sizing the body at all. But if there's dirt or dust or a little bit of water or who knows what else, a blade of grass gets in there, because we shoot in the field, we're not on a bench, so I want it to just chamber every single time. Now 1 to 2 thousandths of shoulder setback isn't going to wear the body out. You aren't going to get the little thin line here and get a case head separation. I've had plus P edge cases with 8 firings on them with no problem. 260 cases with 12 to 15 firings on them with no problem. I full-length size everything. Now the tool we use to measure our shoulder setback and our shoulder bump is a number one, a digital micrometer. You can use just a regular dial micrometer, but the digitals are just way easier to use. And this comparator body from Sinclair with a bump gauge insert that goes in it. And each one of these inserts matches the shoulder taper of the cartridge you're using it for. So I just put it in there and I measure to the head, and it gives me my fired case dimension, which is 2.4175. I don't know if you can see that or not. Run it through the die. .4155, 2 thousandths of shoulder bump right there. So with the Redding bushing die, if I want to get 2 thousandths of neck grip, and it's a 366 thousandths diameter with a bullet seated in it, I'm going to run a 364 thousandths bushing. So that's what I have in the die here. So basically what we do, and remember this is a pretty big case, and all I have on it is Hornady one-shot. Just run it in there. And you can feel it when it hits the shoulder, and you can feel the setback, and then pull it back out. There's no expander in here anymore, it's just the bushing. gives me a nice, perfectly round neck. Alright, I'll finish these up, and then the next step will be going back into the tumbler for about an hour to get the extra lubricant off, and then we'll work on trimming the cases. Okay, cases are all sized now. They've gone back through the tumbler to remove lubricant. Now I'm going to trim them. What I'm using for a trimmer is a Wilson case trimmer. It's just a real basic lathe type trimmer with a cutting head on the end that comes out for cleaning. This one is hot rodded up by Sinclair. It comes with an elevated stand, a slide over clamp, and a micrometer adjuster. The micrometer is very accurate and very repeatable. If you write your numbers down here on the adjustment marks, you can go back and set it up to trim that case to the exact measurement again. So it's a really neat unit. So to trim, for each family of cases, they sell a case holder here. So this is a 300 or 338 Ultra Mag case holder. And you slide the case in, and then just tap it on the bench to give it a compression fit. Then you put it on the rail, clamp it down, and just turn the cutter. And it just stops when it gets to the end of the base here. And you just pop it out. And it gives you a very nice square cut. And the cut on the neck is completely square with the body now. Okay, with the trimming done now, I'll go ahead and chamfer the inside of the cut. And I use this VLD tool from Sinclair. And then I use just a regular RCBS outside tool to deburr the outside of the neck. And then when I'm done with that, I go back in the tumbler for about 15 or 20 minutes, just take any pieces of shavings or anything out of the case, and then I'm on to priming. Okay, I'm getting ready to prime these cases. The last thing I do before I drop the primers in them is I clean the inside of the necks out with an alcohol swab. There's kind of two schools of thought here. A lot of guys have gone the direction of either not cleaning out the insides of the necks at all and leaving some carbon in there to act as a lubricant for the bullet. Some other guys are cleaning the necks out and they're actually applying a dry lubricant, like a graphite powder, to the inside of the neck in an effort to make the friction between the case neck and the bullet identical from round to round to lower their extreme spread in their velocities. Now, something that I noticed was I was having some pretty good numbers with new brass, and then I was getting some higher ES, well, not bad, but it was higher with my once fired cases. So I decided to go the other direction and actually clean the inside of my necks completely back down to the brass surface. Now, these little alcohol swabs you can get just about anywhere, a drugstore or in the first aid section of a grocery store or whatever. And it's really simple. It cleans out any carbon that I didn't get with the brush when I first cleaned the cases out, and it makes sure that there's no residual lubricant left inside the case neck. And I've just had really good luck doing this, so I'm just going to keep doing it. Okay, now I'm getting ready to prime the cases. It'll be the last step before I start dropping powder and seating bullets. My 338 Edge, I like to run CCI Magnum primers. They're 250s, the large rifle size. To seat them, I use this RCBS hand tool. It's a real simple little unit. You put the primers in this tray, wiggle them around. It's got a serrated edge on it. It flips the primers up in the right direction, and you're off to the races. So all you have to do is just slide the case in the shell holder, seat it, make sure it's not protruding, and drop it in your loading block. Now, as I'm doing this, I like to take a look down the inside of the case and make sure there isn't any debris in there, like corn cob or whatever left over from the tumbling action. Make sure there isn't anything stuck in the primer hole. I usually don't have any problem with the corn cob that I'm using because it's big enough that it won't get stuck. So anyway, there it is, priming the cases. Okay, I'm getting ready to pour powder in these cases. For 338 Edge Plus P, I use H1000. Now is as good a time as any to have a little safety briefing. One of the first safety rules that you must follow when you're hand loading is to only keep the powder that you're using in that particular case on the bench while you're doing it. Don't put the container away until you're done and you've emptied your hopper back into the container. Make sure the container is well marked. If you dump all your 1-pounders into one of these 8-pound kegs that you have left over, make sure you write on them that that's what's in there and what the new lot number is on the side of the keg. You know, you could really cause a lot of damage to yourself and to your rifle by putting the wrong kind of powder in at some of these amounts of powder that we pour in these cases. So that's a really good thing to teach yourself, is to only have the powder that you're using at the time out on the bench while you're doing it. Okay, this is the RCBS Chargemaster. It has 1500 scale here, which means it can measure 1500 grains. Now, I've had this scale for quite a while now. I was a late bloomer to the automatic dispenser, so mine doesn't automatically dispense when you put the powder measure or the powder hopper back on there, the little tray. So I have to do it manually, but it's very simple. I've already calibrated to this for 0, so I'm going to input my charge weight, which is 98 grains, enter, and hit dispense. And it shuts off when the scale shows 98 grains. It's pretty slick. Now, one of the modifications I did to this, which really isn't a modification, is I stuck a McDonald's straw up inside the tube here, and that allows it to be a little finer drop rather than clumping up at the end. You know, when it needs that 1/10 of a grain, it doesn't drop 3/10 of a grain. So that's the one thing I did, was I put a little chunk of McDonald's straw in there, and it's really helped this to be accurate on all the throws. So the next thing I do now is, when I get done, is I dump the powder into my first case. Another habit you get into is to dump the powder put the tray back on the scale and move the funnel right away. That keeps you from dumping another powder charge into the same case, which just makes a great big mess here. So that's one of the things to get into the habit of. While I'm doing this, I'm going to throw this out here. This is a powder funnel by Extreme Hardcore Gear that they sent me last year to try out. Boy, if you want to go to Cadillac route, this is the way to go. It's a beautiful piece of equipment. It's anodized aluminum. It's set up for caliber, so this is a 338 one. It has a step inside that lets this seal against the mouth and the neck every time. You don't ever have any leaking or anything like that. And it's heavy enough that it stays put and doesn't tip over or anything. It's a great setup by Extreme Hardcore Gear. Now, if you don't want to go the Cadillac route, you know, just a simple plastic funnel like this is what I used for a long time. But they do tend to tip a little bit sometimes, and they might get a kernel of powder up under the lip there when you're moving them. Just something to think about. Okay, I have this block loaded up now, 50 rounds with powder, and the last thing I like to do before I start putting bullets in them is just tilt the block and look down straight into every case. You know, make sure every one of them has powder in it, make sure every one of them looks the same. You know, I've never had a squib, but it probably isn't very much fun with a Canyon rifle when you're out in the woods and you're hunting and you're taking a long-range shot. So it's cheap insurance just to look down in the cases, make sure nothing's out of place and they all look right. And everything does, so it's time to seat bullets. Okay, so now I'm in the bullet seating stage of this loading process. It's the final stage, other than testing and confirming. Yesterday, my daughter Jessica and I went out and we shot in the Sportsman's Challenge Big Game Shoot. Conditions were tricky, to say the least, and we shot between the two of us about 15 more rounds than I thought we would. So now I have 13 total loaded rounds that I own for the Canyon rifle. And that's just not acceptable during spring bear season. I've got this full bin here now full of empties, so I need to make some fulls. So one of the reasons I was waiting till after the shoot to seat the bullets and finish this video is I was at about 250 rounds on the Canyon rifle since the last time I checked throat wear. I wanted to make sure that I didn't have to adjust my seating depth. I've been running Match Kings at about 10 thousandths off the lands with excellent success that way, so I wanted to keep it that way. I did a measurement on the Canyon rifle and it all looked good. It's still running at 3.174 before I get contact to the lands of the Match King. So I'm going to keep my seating depth at 3.164. Okay, so how I check my seating depth in my rifles is with this overall length gauge. This is a Stony Point. It's a pretty old tool. I believe Hornady owns this now. It's called Lock and Load, but it's the same design, same tool. And it's just an aluminum tube that's threaded on one end, and it has a Delrin rod that slides through it. And at the end of the tube, it's got a flat for a caliper blade. Now what you do is you take a modified case. You can buy these over the counter for common cartridges like 260, 308, 7 rem mag, whatever. You can buy these for the rifle that are just ready to go. For the oddballs, you're going to have to take a fired case and give it to your gunsmith or send it to somebody to thread it unless you have a lathe handy, and thread the end of it. That end threads onto the end of the tool. Until you hit the stop. Then you take a bullet, same bullet you want to shoot, drop it down in the end there, and this has a thumb screw that you loosen, and this will go up inside the chamber, and then you just push that plastic rod until the bullet hits the lands. Now when you're comfortable with how it feels to you, you just lock the thumb screw down and pull it all back out. And sometimes this will, depending on how much pressure you put on it to hit the lands, especially on the bigger cartridges, this will stick in the bore. And all I do is this is all out, and I just take the rifle and stand it on its butt and just tap it on the floor real quick, and usually the bullet just falls out. Now I like to take 4 or 5 measurements and write them down until I get an average, and it'll help you develop a feel for how you put the tool in there and put the bullet up inside the bore. It doesn't really matter how you do it, as long as you do it consistently and you can repeat it later on. So, keep good notes, write down how much pressure you put on it or whatever, and it'll help you later on because you're going to want to keep track of your throat wear simply so that you can get a good consistent seating depth 300, 400, or 500 rounds down the road. Okay, I've measured the throat on my Canyon rifle. It hasn't moved at all. I'm at 3.174, which is where it was 250 rounds ago, so I'm not going to mess with it at all. My seating depth isn't going to change from my last batch of ammo that I loaded for it, so I'm going to seat these at 3.164 to jump 10 thousandths to the lands. It's been pretty good with these Match Kings. I've had very consistent accuracy with them. Very low ES. It's just been a really good load for me, so I'll start loading a couple here and show you how it goes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about bullets. This is a 300 grain 338 caliber Sierra Match King bullet. It's an open tip match, hollow point bullet. The tip of it's called the nose or the tip. Then the slope portion here is the ogive, and then where the ogive hits the bearing surface is the kind of a shoulder junction. Then you have the bearing surface. That's the part that actually rides the lands when it's shot. And then at the back of it you have the heel, and it's a boat tail bullet, so it has this sloped heel. Now the reason we measure at the ogive, which is what we're doing when we use the comparator and the insert, is the junction of the ogive and the bearing surface is where the bullet's first going to contact the lands when it gets shot. So that's the number that we're most concerned with, because the amount of jump, or the amount of, if you do it this way, if you want to jam it in the lands when you shoot it, the amount of jam, or the jump, will directly affect your accuracy, your precision, your consistency, your velocity, and your extreme spread in your velocity. So we want to keep that number as exact as we can, and we need to keep track of it so that we can duplicate the jump further down the road when our barrel, the throat starts to wear on the barrel. So that's why we measure it there, because this portion of the bullet where the ogive and the bearing surface meet is very consistent. We can set up our tooling, we can set up our measuring tools to measure it exactly at that point, and it'll be the same on every bullet. Now, if you measure off the tip to the end of the case, you have the risk of getting an inconsistent piece of jacket there on the tip from bullet to bullet that could show you 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, whatever difference from round to round, and it'll drive you crazy trying to seat your bullets. So the ogive is the best place to do it, right where the ogive and the bearing surface meets. It's very easy to do once you understand how, and that's how we do it for our consistency. Okay, this is what it looks like when you're doing the measurement on checking your seating depth coming out of the die. Basically, you've got the anvil of your caliper here, then you have the comparator body and the insert, the 3.3 insert. I've already checked the throat wear on the Canyon rifle. Everything looks good. It hasn't burned at all in 250 rounds, so I'm still jumping 10,000, so my load's going to be my seating depth, my max seating depth on the Canyon rifle for contacting the lands with the Sierra Match King is 3.174. So I'm going to seat them 10,000ths off because I've had really good luck with these bullets that way. So I'm going to seat them at 3.164. And once I get this all locked down, I'll check every one of them just to be safe. But with the profile on the Sierra Match King and the seating stem here in the competition seating die, I just haven't had any problems. So it's off to the races. Okay, when I'm seating, I like to be very smooth about it and do it exactly the same way every time, with the same velocity, same force, and the same pause at the top. There's some elasticity to the brass that you're loading, so I like to take out any factors of going fast, going hard, or anything like that to just make sure that I'm getting the same amount of pressure on my stroke through the die and giving it time to hit all the way to where it's going to stop every single time. So I don't know if it's that big of a deal, but one of the things that I really, really believe in with hand loading or long-range shooting or anything like that that requires a lot of precision is that consistency is almost as important as technique. So however you do it, I think you're always safe to be consistent about it. In other words, do it exactly the same way every time. So I'll just pull the round off the loading block here, put it in the shell holder, grab a bullet, start it up in the die, and then once it gets into that sleeve, it's all supported. I don't have to worry about anything else anymore, and I'll come down nice and slow, and I can feel the spring in the die, and I'll hit the bottom, and I'll give it about a 1 second pause, and then pull it back out. Now, this should be 3.164, so let's see what we end up with. So 3.164. Consistency, that's the biggest thing. Now on the Canyon rifle, on this 338 Edge plus P ammo, I check the seating depth of every round that I load, simply because it's so important to keep that seating depth consistent for your pressure and your velocities. I hold these to a 5/10,000ths tolerance to the seating depth that I'm going for, and it's really helped me, I think, to get single-digit extreme spread in my velocities, and that's important when you're starting to reach out quite a ways. If you just look in your program, in your ballistic program, and fiddle with the velocity numbers and start changing your velocity, say you're running some velocities and you have a 20 or 30 foot per second spread, that might not make any difference at all at 500 or 600 or 700 yards. But if you start plugging those numbers in and change your velocity up or down by 20 or 30 feet a second and see what the correction value difference is at, say, 1,200, 1,500, 1,700 yards, it starts to add up quite a bit. And a half minute at 1,200 yards is 6 inches, and that's 6 inches of vertical dispersion that you don't have to give up if you get low extreme spreads. So that's something to think about if you're shooting a rifle that you're only going to shoot out to 400 or 500 yards. You know, you don't need to be this picky. You might get it for free, and that's always a good thing. You know, more consistency never hurt anybody. But you can run a pretty high ES, say a 20 to 30 foot per second ES, and still have some amazing accuracy at 100, 200, 300, 400. So, you know, this might not be for everybody, but if you can get it without a lot of effort, it can't hurt. So anyway, that's why I'm very picky about my Canyon rifle ammo, simply because it's a purpose-built rifle that, you know, its job is to go out and do the things that normal rounds can't do. So that's what I like to do. Okay, that's it. I'm at the end of it now. I've got everything written down in my notebook, so I can go back and duplicate my load 6-8 months down the road if I need to. Keep everything in these hard plastic boxes. On the inside of the lid here, I've got a card taped to it that has the date, what the load is, what the seating depth is, any special notes I might have to think about with this ammo. The next step is going to be shoot several rounds over at magneto speed. Make sure my velocity is where it is, where it's supposed to be. From the last batch, I'll check extreme spreads and make sure it's nice and low, single digits, and then I'll take it and I'll shoot it on a plate 700 or 800 yards away and make sure it holds a nice small group, half minute or less, right in the center of the plate, and I'm off to the races. So I'm going to go do some spring bear hunting. Thanks for watching. See you next time.